Everyone that's on today's webinar, I want to thank you for joining us. I'm Frank Mortimer, and I'm your host. And with us, we have two veterans in the higher ed tech community. We have Anthony Humphreys, president of BlackBeltHelp, and Lou
Hello.
Delzompo from KAI Partners. Why don't we first hear a little bit about you? Lou, can you give us a quick bio about yourself?
Oh boy, quick bio might take a while, but I'm a senior enterprise architect with KAI Partners. We're a consulting firm in Northern California with clients around the United States in higher education, state and local governments, and the federal government as well. And so my current client assignment is with the State University of New York system, where I'm their enterprise architect. But I've had a bunch of experience in the California community college system, as well as the K-12 systems in California and other parts of the country as well. Prior to that, I was in technology fields. I was the CTO for the transcripts company Parchment, and then even going back a lot further, other technology companies like Apple Computer and Sun Microsystems. So I'm a developer engineer at sort of at my core, and been in senior management now for quite a while.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lou. Anthony, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Okay, great. Thanks, Frank. So a bit of a higher ed background. This is, well, I'll just say more than 30 years. I don't want to age myself. But for many years in California, I was at the community colleges and four-year publics as a financial aid director and a VP of students, and loved it. That's where I found my passion. And my passion really is serving students and helping institutions find ways to serve their students and constituents in a better way. So that was sort of my beginning. I then left and went into the ed tech world, went to Ellucian for 10 years and ran their product management team, and then went to Blackboard for 10 years and ran their one-stop team, and then came here about 5 years ago to be the president of BlackBeltHelp. So again, thanks everybody for joining. And again, passions every day, the things that get me up and get me out of bed are how do we serve students, staff, and faculty in a faster, better way?
Great. Well, and so the whole focus of this webinar is how to implement an AI strategy in higher ed support services. So before we jump into that, why don't we talk about what is AI and how is it being used in higher ed? Anthony, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, AI is an interesting topic, and it's huge. So I like to make, whenever things are huge and complex like AI is, I like to make them the most simple as possible. Bottom line is AI are machines and computers mimicking human behavior. That's it. Now, it gets incredibly complex from there, but that's what AI is about. How do we make machines and computers and other technologies smart enough, quote unquote, to really mimic our behavior and serve students, staff, and faculty? I know there's a whole other series. We can kind of get into the types of AI in terms of generative versus non-generative, and really kind of the stages of AI, if you will, because there is kind of an evolution. And we'll get into that maybe a little bit later, or if Lou wants to cover some of that. But that's in its most basic form what it is.
Lou, anything
I don't know
to add?
Comments you want to add?
I'm sorry, I missed that part.
Would you like to add anything to what Anthony said about AI? What is it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the current conversations have been around the generative AI like ChatGPT and others. And I think if the recent statistics are to be believed, something greater than 40% of all web browser sessions on the internet now include the use of some kind of generative AI, either with Microsoft, Google's tools, or from OpenAI. So quite a few people are getting experience with it and have interactions with it. But that's just one, as Anthony hinted at, that's just one type of AI. And really the key there is the ability to have an interaction with a computer that mimics human behavior. And so if you think about what some of the challenges are, like I know I was on hold with my internet service provider yesterday for over 3 hours So I interacted a lot with a chatbot. And so if you think about the current state of chatbots and, kind of like what people are experiencing, that is not an interaction with a human. Everybody can tell. But if you look at what's going on with ChatGPT, it sometimes gets very, very difficult to discern the difference between the computer and a human. So I think that's where we are in AI right now.
And we hear a lot about ChatGPT and on the academic side, but there is some applications to it on the services side. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the ability to, for example, I saw an example where someone had set up a way for some of it wasn't a chat GPT, it was a different kind of large language model, but they had set it up so that they parsed their incoming email, tried to discern whether or not the email was quote unquote important at that time to them. And then if it wasn't, it automatically generated a response that wasn't I'll get back to you, but it was actually here's how I'm going to interact and help you out. So if you look at those kinds of applications, it gets to be a big help to somebody right away. Other places, you think about how it might affect someone's job, and I know we'll probably get into that, touch that a little bit later, but there are some things where people are worried that it's going to basically take over their job. If you look at some of the jobs that people have today, you could make a really strong case that AI is going to be able to do most of what that individual is currently doing. But I think, as leaders in any industry, certainly in higher ed, we have a responsibility to think beyond that and to think about, how is it going to be an enhancement to people's jobs, those kinds. So, yeah, there's quite a few applications that are more than just toy applications now that are both emergent on the market and are already in the market.
Understood. And Anthony, so we did, Lou talked about chatbots and ChatGPT, and how are you seeing those used, and what's the reception like?
Yeah, it's interesting. When and I'm sure Lou does as well, right? We meet with a lot of college presidents, provosts, VPs of student services, and even VPs of academic affairs. And there certainly is a mixture of emotion out there, right? And some of those emotions are things from faculty like, how will I know if my student is the one writing this paper they're turning in? And there are tools now, of course, to do that. So with any new technology, tools come out, kind of just like proctoring back in the day, to make sure that student is actually doing the work. But I think the key to focus on are what are the benefits that really can help higher ed close the gap, if you will, because there's an enormous customer service gap today at so many institutions. I remember my undergrad and my grad school experiences, and just the ability for people to be available, be it 24/7 or late into the evening, to answer questions for me as a student or a working grad student was really challenging. It's tough for institutions, not just from a budget perspective, but it's really getting incredibly difficult for institutions to hire staff today. It used to be that whether you're a four-year public, a four-year private, or a two-year public, or a for-profit institution, it used to be kind of one of the better jobs in the community, right? It was sort of working at the hospital, working for the K-12 district, or working for your local college or university. Those were some of the best jobs in the market available. And what we're hearing from so many college leaders is they're now just not able to find, hire, and retain really top-notch talent in the services area. I don't think that's as much of an issue maybe in the faculty of the teaching and learning, which granted is the massive core of what an institution does. But if you can't serve a student in a way that they expect to be served, then they may not stick around for the teaching and learning. So that's kind of, to me, the crux of the issue. And maybe just very briefly, I think there are 5 quick things where AI can really help higher ed. And some of them apply more than others, and I'll just run through them real quick, and I'm sure they'll come back up later in the session. But for me, it's really, how do we automate some things? how do we improve decision making? Because sometimes, not always, but sometimes on some easier decisions, it's better for a computer to make that decision. Sometimes they're faster. And here are the big three that I think for higher ed: personalization, predictive analytics, and enhanced customer service. I know sometimes customer is not the best word for higher ed, but to me, those three things, if we can personalize their experience, if we can provide some level of predictive analytics of what they might ask next or when they want service, and if we can then provide a better service level, those three things I think will drive up student engagement. And not only that, but staff engagement as well.
And I think calling them customers is right on, because I think that's how the students have evolved over time. Is that, when the three of us were in school, they told us what to buy, we bought it, and we were lockstep. Now, with the Amazon mentality, it's, I have a question, I want an answer right now. I don't, it doesn't matter what day it is, a weekend, we need an answer right now. And I also think that with the huge benefit of ChatGPT is that how many discussions it started. And part of this webinar is, well, okay, everyone's talking about these AI chatbots, and so we got to do something. And that's why it's all about why it's time to start thinking about this implementation strategy. So Lou, do you want to touch on that a little bit about like some of the factors going into why really crafting a good strategy is important, and some things that we should think about?
Sure. I think there's an aspect that really we haven't discussed a lot so far, and that's the policy aspect of all these tools. So from a faculty standpoint, Anthony, you mentioned about how faculty people are concerned, how, is what I'm being submitted actually written by the student? Well, assuming that almost every student has access to the technology, and it's somewhat like a word processor now, where I'm going to use it because it's available to me. You have to develop an administrative policy for how you're going to deal with this. And so it forces leaders at colleges and universities to think a little bit about, like, for example, is using these kinds of tools plagiarism or not? Well, what if you cite it as a source? Is that acceptable? Those kinds of things, nobody can come in and say, technology, we're going to dictate this. This has to come from inside the core of the college and university. What are they going to do? In a similar way, people have to get beyond that impact to really look at teaching and learning now as an operation, and say, can the technology be used to automate grading, for example? Can it be used to automate the creation of assessments and the analysis of those assessments once they're submitted? And the answer is yes to all of those, and people are doing it right now. And so, but does that impact things like tenure at a college? If someone's using this technology, are they on the tenure track still, right? Or are they considered using a crutch to being on tenure track? These are all questions that I've heard people ask, and sort of converse about. No one has an answer yet, and so I think there's blazing a trail for some of those things. With respect to the implementation of things for the assistance of things like A&R work, for example, like getting somebody from being interested in coming to your institution to being registered for courses, right? Now, I think the gold standard is maybe a half an hour, right? If you're running a registration event or a recruiting event and someone walks in and says, I'm really interested, in a half an hour, 30-minute period, can you get that student enrolled and registered for classes? Great. Well, what if they're not at a recruiting event? What if they woke up at, after their job, or they're still awake after their job completed at a nighttime job, and now they say, I really want to go to college, right? Can they do all of those tasks in the same 30 minutes where they're not interacting with someone face to face? And the answer in most cases is no, you can't do that, right? There's nobody there to answer the phone, as Anthony said. There's no one there to be on the other side of the chatbot. And so, can AI practices make that still happen? Well, in this era of declining enrollment, that could make or break some institutions. The ability to do that. So I think that's a pretty important thing, that just the application of the technology for real operational goals of the institution, not necessarily, is a student cheating or am I cheating by using them? The other things that we haven't touched on a little bit are the analytics around the data. And so one of the things that artificial intelligence is, traditionally, if you can use that word in AI now, but traditionally good at, is the machine learning behind these things to crunch data and come out with trends and these kinds of things. So, Frank, you show up and, you've got an interest in a few things for your career. And it's like, traditionally you would sit with a counselor, do an education plan, develop your degree process and all the rest of it. Can there be some artificial intelligence that compares you to a bunch of students like you that have gone to an institution in the past and say, these are some pathways to success that we've seen that's worked for people like you, and then now you have a customized plan that's really based on actual data. So I think all of these things are eminently possible, but there is a little bit of a how do I do this when I'm really busy? I've already got a full-time job. How do I learn all this new stuff? And how do I not sound stupid in doing it, right? So the traditional people part of any technology project is still, for AI projects, I think still maybe the hardest part.
And Anthony, I'm going to ask you to follow up, because like Lou gave a concrete example of recruiting. And can you provide some scenarios of what that would look like, and maybe some other specific department examples of how AI could be used on campus?
Yeah, sure. And again, I think the key to any implementation for an institution, and institutions are super complex, right? There's multiple constituents, multiple department heads, multiple budgets. And when those types of situations exist, then bringing on board something that is as complex as AI and really doing it as a strategy versus just sort of a box checking exercise, I think it can require some additional help from outside the institution. Those are some of the reasons why I think we're here talking to the teams today and the group today. But to me, it really is all about being planful. And that planning really does need to start early, before even the decision maybe is made to move to AI. And that may be a foregone conclusion today, right? But the concept of, what do we want this tool to do? Because AI is a tool like any other. It's a wonderful tool and a complex tool. But what is our goal with leveraging this tool? Do we want to serve students, staff, faculty? Do we want to serve additional community constituents? And really, what are the outcomes desired? And once you kind of start there, and what can really help is having some assistance, be it through companies like Lou's or ours, is really to help define what those goals are, and to really also help the teams make those goals real and actionable, right? Because if they're real and they're actionable and they're achievable, then you'll get real change from your tool. And by starting that first, maybe after the decision of saying, hey, we're going to leverage this wonderful tool, but before there's an acquisition, before there's an RFP let, know what your outcomes are, because everyone will have different outcomes. Your goal could be to improve student efficiency in the recruiting process, like Lou mentioned. Some of the tools out there, maybe the goal is to streamline the process to bring up a chatbot and make it easy by saying, leverage a generative chatbot to create some knowledge base articles that then maybe the team reviews, versus having to create them from scratch. So there's just tremendous efficiencies that can be gained, sometimes in the areas that are more mundane, like implementation. But then at the end of the day, having clear outcomes. We want to drive student engagement up by this amount. We want to, and you can track that by looking at maybe the the outcomes and the customer sat ratings or student sat ratings after each interaction that a student may have with whatever technology is being leveraged with AI. Because that's sort of at the end of the day what we hear from leaders, from college presidents, provosts, vice presidents, that say they must have. Because when they go to their board for approval or ask for budget, no one gives budget anymore without what is your goal, how will you achieve it, and what is your plan to get there, and what's your timeline. And those things can be just kind of fraught with pitfalls, right? And having some assistance from maybe outside the institution can be very, very helpful. Even if it's just someone that is already has some of the same ideas that the institution may have, it may be politically easier on campus for someone from the outside to help the different groups and to kind of corral the different groups into saying, those are great ideas, but again, folks, what's our goal? And if it doesn't meet our goal, do we really need that tool, or do we need to change our goal? And those can be really helpful. So that's my thought. And then Frank, just briefly to answer some of your questions, there are just a host of options with AI, whether it's streamlining an admission process, streamlining a FAFSA completion process, or even reaching out to students that have applied, that have been accepted, and maybe even deposited for housing, but haven't applied for financial aid, or haven't applied for housing assistance, or for things to help students that are maybe food insecure, that could be a threat to that student's continuing enrollment. And AI can be really very, very powerful in suggesting an equal and a message that is kind of equitably released to all students, so that everyone feels that they're getting a chance to hear a message that might help them through a particular process, be it enrollment, be it housing, be it matriculation, be it financial aid. So those are some of the things that I can think of right away. Last couple things are obviously things like an interactive chat bot. So not necessarily maybe an FAQ bot. Those are very valuable too. But I think a lot of institutions may have those. But the ability for a bot to say, authenticate to me, student, and then you can ask me questions like, how much aid do I have? When will I get that financial aid? What's my balance due? How do I apply for an emergency loan? When will I graduate? Those are all very sometimes complex questions that an integrated bot that is leveraging AI can answer very, very quickly and 24/7.
What's exciting that both of you said is how AI can utilize data and almost become like a personal assistant for students. And so I could envision in the near future that we would have, like, every student would almost have their personalized bot that would be like, hey, it's time to apply for financial aid. Hey, based on this, you should look at these courses, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's pretty cool. And that clearly is in the future. I also heard both of you talk about, like, what are the needs of the institution, what are the goals, and what are the outcomes. So Lou, I'm going to turn this one to you, and then just say, what would your recommendations be for doing a proper needs assessment?
It turns out that the answer to that is unearths one of the bigger challenges I think institutions have, which is understanding how things are working inside their institution today. Are they tracking data on what are the top 50 questions that students have through their whole process, right? If you've deployed any kind of chatbot, it's basically, as Anthony said, Q&A kind of model. You predetermine the kinds of questions that you might get asked, but are you actually going back into that data and determining what are the ones that weren't answered correctly? What are the open areas? What are prospective students having trouble with? Why does a student not show up for the first day of class, and never show up after they've gone through the whole process? Is tapping into things like determining is fraud a real big issue for you, and is something, can something in the AI area help with the fraud kinds of things. All of these things require you to be data aware, I guess, as an institution, and a lot of times that's not the case. So a really important thing to do is to say, what are the areas that we need to discover and start tracking data on before we can make a wholesale recommendation about one or the other? and how these tools are going to be used. Now, I think it's incredibly difficult in this day and time about AI because it's moving so quickly. Everybody feels that they're falling behind, right? If they haven't got some kind of program in place today, their institution will be in a much more negative light to another institution that may have some kind of program going forward, right? The key, I think, is to recognize that every institution's in this space now. Every institution is going to be facing the same challenges, and to actually, do that process of learning your own environment, trying to figure out what it is. From that point, you need to decide whether the use of AI and the leverage of AI is now going to be a part and parcel of every department on campus. Is it going to be a specialty department? Is IT the center of the AI leadership, at an institution? I think there's pros and cons to all those models. So you have to figure out who's going to be involved in it, and to what extent are they going to be involved. Student services seems to be the logical starting point in a lot of cases. Just a VP of student services or a VP of administrative services running point on some of these things. That seems to be the case, but that's not for every institution. It may not be the right one. In some cases, I've heard like IT reports into student services, right? And so for that model, I'd say, whoa, heck, that seems like a perfect fit for where the center of AI should be in that kind of an organization. But in other cases, IT reports into a different part of the organizational structure, or it may report directly to the president, and then the president has to make the call. There's a lot of those kinds of questions that are organizational change management at its core. How are you going to do that in order to take advantage of these technologies? But yeah, to build the actual case, to answer your question more directly, it all is in, how much data have you been gathering, and what processes do you use to analyze your data? Right. So student success data is one thing, but this is about the operation of the institution itself. Right. And so I'm not sure that I would be able to hazard even a guess at a percentage of how many institutions are tracking that data on a solid basis and are in a position to leverage it. But I think that's important. You got to be able to provide the metric that says, maybe it takes 3 hours to go through the registration process at your organization, and you really want to get to 30 minutes. It's like, okay, that's your overarching goal. Let's get it down to 30 minutes. Or, I want to support 30 minutes of interaction at 11 p.m. Local time for the institution. Those kinds of things may end up being where you end up as a starting point. But you really need to know a lot more about, what are the kinds of questions you have.
Great. So it sounds like, to summarize what you said, is that have concrete goals in mind before you start, and then look for ways to solve them. Yeah,
I think every leader in an educational institution can rattle off what they believe are the top 5 things that they wish they could improve. Right. But then you have to dig down below those top 5 things and actually unearth where the data is that sort of can be tracked to prove that you're going to get better at those things. Right. So, and that takes time.
Now, Anthony, you've sat on both sides of the desk with figuring out what these needs should be. Would you have any recommendations for people that are just beginning to think about, I got to do this, what should I look for?
Yeah, I think aside from getting some help if needed, and that help may come from on campus as well, from folks, maybe faculty or staff that are particularly interested in this topic. But I do think, and there are some great questions too in the Q&A that kind of relate to that as well. So I may just answer a couple of those as well. I think the key is, again, to focus on what your goal is, and then look for things that are, to some extent, the low-hanging fruit. Start small, get those wins. Hear from students if it's student focused or if it's faculty or staff driven, but I would suggest students focused first. Get those quick wins where you hear students in the response to their survey questions, or if you do some student focus groups on campus, or even if you just do some random surveying, get those quick wins from students that say things like, wow, this was so great. The tool was able to anticipate my questions. When I was working with a chatbot, my question was about how much do I owe? But of course, that question would lead to something like, well, how can I make this payment? Are there emergency loan programs? Are there ways for me to stay in school or to stay at the university or institution, despite maybe the ability not to pay? Is there a payment plan? And those are things that AI can very easily sort of predict and or kind of seed next, so that a student doesn't just come in and say, I have one question and then leave, when maybe 2 seconds later they have 10 more. And what a great customer service experience, right? When a student or a constituent can say, boy, it answered my question, but then it anticipated the question that I didn't even know to ask. And that's what really drives student affinity and student engagement. One of the questions that came in, I think, was, outside of the classroom, are most solutions focused on admissions and retention? Well, they're certainly there, but there's really focus everywhere. There's focus in student services, in finance and administration and bill payment, and certainly in either other areas, right? Knowing if a student has a military background and then prompting them to say, have you applied for military benefits or veterans benefits for the institution? There's just great opportunity that really is not hard for an AI tool, whether it's a chat bot or a voice bot or other tools, to sort of try to lead students down a pathway, and a very productive pathway, as Lou mentioned earlier, right? Pathways are really what it's all about, and making it easy for that student to say, I'm here for teaching and learning, but whenever I need service, boy, it's so easy at my institution to get that service. And today I might want to call someone at 2 a.m, but tomorrow I might want to use a chat bot. The next day I might want to look up and use a knowledge base on my own without any staff interaction. But whatever those different modalities are, it's really making it easy and making it multimodal, because that's when a student is going to say, wow, you really get me. And you've thought about how to deliver service to me, not only about how my classroom experience is.
And that's important because, as we said before, students are customers. And so the more customer satisfaction, the better everything's going to be. So
yeah, one thing, maybe if I could just add a quick follow-up. So Frank, I think you touched on something very important. And I know some institutions don't like the word customer, but thinking of students as customers helps you look at them from the perspective of we at the institution, we are there to serve them, right? The student is here for teaching and learning, but our job in student services or staff services or faculty service is to serve those constituents and to serve them in a way that they want to be served in. And the one thing about being a customer, as we all know, customers, whether it's at Amazon or if you take your car in for service or whatever the experience is, we will vote with our feet. And if we don't get served, we will go somewhere that will. And anyone that doubts that in higher ed just needs to look at the amazing growth in alternative education, in adult education, and all the different areas that are beyond just that traditional education that's been offered in the past. Traditional education will always be here, but so many students are saying, hey, I might need something different. And if it meets my need, I'll be happy to pay more for it, frankly.
There's a question in the Q&A, Frank, that I'd like to talk about a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure.
It's about when searching for AI partners, what should be kept in mind. And one thing I would say is that I think it might be a better perspective to ask the questions about your current vendors and new vendors about how are they going to employ AI in their products for your benefit. I think it's maybe the wrong perspective, or not as efficient a perspective, to think of it as searching for an AI partner, because really all of these tools are going to roll into some kind of existing model. I mean, higher education may dramatically change as a result of AI, and let's put that aside for a second as a separate question. But in its current mode, for example, I was involved in a conversation about transcript articulation, or articulation of classes. And the individual institution was talking about a product from a very well-known vendor, which I won't mention, where the basic gist of it was to provide a repository of information so that a articulation officer at the incoming institution could make a decision about whether course credit is applied to the student who's coming in. And I said to myself, this just seems like a perfect application for AI. It's content driven. It's built on, you could build it on a large base of decisions that have already been made by the existing individuals. Why continue to have a product that requires, so much work on the part of an articulation officer? Get a recommendation very quickly from something that's AI enabled. And when I told our client to go ask that of the vendor had no good answer for when they were going to be able to employ AI. And I think that's a measuring stick of a vendor, right? If a vendor has no good answer, that tells you something right there. We're at a stage where every vendor needs to have some answer about what they're going to do about artificial intelligence. Again, Lou's opinion, but I think it's an easy one to defend.
Well, and that, thank you for that answer. And that kind of goes into the final one I was going to ask you, but I'll just kind of summarize and see if there's anything else either of you want to add, is how to find vendors that you can trust. And it sounds like, Lou, what you're suggesting is ask them what their AI strategy is to see how on top of the game they are for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's probably one of those things you should have going in now as a potential customer or a current customer, to say, I'm not satisfied with this 3-year implementation cycle for this tool, this enterprise tool anymore, right? I think if you incorporated AI into your product mix, it might be a 6-month implementation cycle now, or a 3-month implementation cycle, or even faster. So those kinds of things where, we don't have to have these huge committee meetings meeting week after week after week in order to complete an implementation anymore. I think that's some of the untapped potential that I see in artificial intelligence now. And that actually, having gone through many of these meetings before, that is one of the things that really excites me, that, hey, we can get away from some of these things, and have it be a little bit more simple. So, but yeah, I think your vendor needs to be informed about the current state of artificial intelligence tools and have a coherent answer to the question of, like, what's your plan? What are your plans for incorporating that? And you see vendors are already making announcements every day, it seems like, right, about some new feature or that feature that's AI based. So, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that, everyone's got to have some kind of a strategy.
Anthony, anything to add?
Yeah, I think so I think, talking to a current partner, so whether you're the vice chancellor of business affairs, or the VP of business, or the VP of students, talking to your colleagues on campus and saying, hey, who are the partners that we're already using? That's a huge first step, because if you're still using them, they're a trusted partner. And you just may not know that trusted partner is already offering a service that can really significantly help the institution. So I think that's a really smart first step, is find out from your different partners who those partners are, because you may not know. For example, we have a lot of partners that where we work with maybe the IT help desk, but not so much on the student services side, or vice versa. And sometimes not everybody at the institution knows what the rest of the institution is doing. So I think certainly starting there is a big first step. And I think what's also great is, and whether those partners are folks that you've used for consulting, for master planning, for outsourcing, whatever that may be, they're probably going to be a person that you trust and someone that you've got a multi-year agreement with. That would also make it easy to partner with them going forward, be it, expanding your contract, trying out a product or a service or a solution, but also just asking those partners, hey, here are my goals again. How would you recommend that we solve them? And they hopefully will come back with some solutions that require AI, but they may also find some other solutions that you may not have thought of. So I think starting there, And then certainly talking to your colleagues, be it at conferences or other events coming up, whether you're going to different conferences like, NASFA or EdgeCon or any of your partner conferences. Those are great places to talk to your colleagues to be able to also get a very unbiased answer of, hey, who have you used and were they successful? And again, the key I think is how did you measure its success, right? Because if you're doing this work and things just look great, but students aren't happier, then that may not be the best goal. But whatever your goals are, which is driving up student satisfaction, increasing engagement, increasing retention, or just finding ways to make students, after you survey them, their life easier. Whatever those goals may be, talking to your partners and then talking to your colleagues is probably the easiest way to kind of get started. And then certainly the last one I'll just mention is looking at places like Inside Higher Ed, kind of trade areas that you may already be talking to, University Business or Inside Higher Ed or others, the Chronicle, etc. They may not certainly, and they don't offer those solutions, but they may be able to steer you to really trusted partners that do.
Great. We've talked about a lot of the topics that for the webinar, but one we haven't that I really want to dig into is, what are some advice that you would give our attendees on an implementation strategy? Like, I think that probably, everyone's looking for some expert advice on how to steer and just, bullet points of what to think about. So if you two could comment on how to get it done, how to do it right the first time so we don't have to redo it in the near future, it'd be great. Anthony, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I hate to harp on it, but I think it is talk to people outside your institution. And maybe I'll expand it. Talk to people outside your sphere, right? So whether it's talking to students, doing some focus groups, but I think the key is if you make it too big, sometimes, as Lou said, you just get a monstrous committee that seems to go on forever. So I do think, one way, of course, is, get some outside help, because you may have some very talented staff, but do they have the time to really devote to managing something that could be as complex as AI? Number one. And then number two, again, as I said earlier, start small, get the quick win, because that quick win can get you the satisfaction ratings or hitting some of the goals that you need, that you can go back to leadership in your administration to request additional funding if needed. But, like I said, leverage your partners that you already have and get some good quick wins. Keep it small. Don't try to solve all of your institution's problems all at once. Bite off a small amount, get a good win, and celebrate those wins, and then market those wins and promote those wins to your constituents, your students, staff, and faculty. And that'll help them say, wow, I really want to do more. This is great.
Yeah, I really liked your last point about, socialize it across the institution, because then that way they can see that it is available and we can do it and we can have success doing it, and then it'll spread even more across campus. Lou, what would you like to add for implementation tips and advice?
I think it's prudent to consider the creation of an AI advisory council within the institution, with the goal of reviewing current administrative policies, as well as teaching and learning policies, and even classroom policies, and come out with something that is a statement that is, as Anthony said, encouraging. So, innovation is thrown out a lot, but if you could get to a point where the provost, the president, the chancellor of the organization can come out with a statement that encourages innovation in this area and the application of AI, as opposed to a fearful kind of statement of, we're not quite sure what's going to happen. We know in 5 years we can't avoid it. I would say, 5 years is really, really conservative. I don't think you can avoid it within the next 6 months, to be honest with you. But so coming out with some kind of statement that encourages innovation and provides everyone within the institution a path towards support. If a faculty member has an idea for leveraging an AI tool in their curriculum, how do they get that support? They get through who in IT or who in their organization or who in the VP of instruction office is going to support it. So getting to the point where you encourage that innovation and provide people with a path towards making, as Anthony said, those baby steps and quick wins forward. I think that's the biggest thing. If you try and tackle some big, huge objective, like, even the example I used of shrinking down enrollment to under 30 minutes, that could be a huge project, right? Many people involved. But if you can encourage the use of the technology and then that information sharing as well, you can bring it to this AI advisory council. You can say, here's what I'm doing. Here's been my experiences so far. Oh, okay, we're going to publish that. So that's really interesting to think through. So that's where I would start. I would start with, as Anthony touched on, the communication aspect across the institution and that policy development role, and less maybe around instantiating a big project to get started. Now if you've already moved into that area as an institution and you've got all these things in place, then I would say that to me, student services is a great starting point, because now you have the student as your customer, and that's really where the heart and soul of the institution really should be, around student support.
Fantastic. We are actually getting close to the end, so here's one of my final questions for you both, is that if we were having this webinar a year ago, ChatGPT would not have been part of the discussion. So what are we going to be talking about a year from now and 3 years from now?
I don't know who wants to start that one, but I would say, be it a year from now or 3 years from now, I think, as Lou touched earlier, the policy questions and the guardrails that need to be established for really generative AI will continue to be an incredible discussion. It's a warranted discussion. You can see all over the media, the biggest single question, you're seeing tech CEOs coming to different government entities and saying, hey, these guardrails are critical. Now, we don't have some of the quote dangers, right, that an open context generative AI tool is going to have, right? Because in higher ed, we can set those guardrails very clearly to say, hey, we're going to handle inquiries around these areas that we just deal with within higher ed. But I think that policy question, and then just continuing improvement. How do we then go to the next level? And really, whether it's kind of like moving from the first stage or the first type of an AI tool that is more kind of a reactive machine approach, how do we get to things like the theory of the mind, or if desired or if needed, some self-awareness, so that the institution on its own with an AI tool can really help students on really complex questions going forward. I think those are going to be the things that are going to be talked about very, very soon, and we'll continue to talk about for a little while.
All right, over to you.
So I've been doing quite a bit of thinking about how AI relates to some of the other technology transitions that I've seen in my lifetime. And is it like the mobile phone? Is it like the introduction of the word processor? Is it like the introduction of the grammar check tool in the word processor? What are some of the parallels that we can join here? But what I think is that we're going to rapidly see an incorporation of artificial intelligence into pretty much everything we do in computing that involves computing at all. So, I wondered, for example, if my watch, I have an Apple Watch, is the Apple Watch going to replace the phone? It's always been one of those questions, like, why do I really need a phone? Right now that I have this Apple Watch, if it's connected to a cellular network, why do I need a phone? those are the kinds of things that I think AI are going to start to drive, right? I think we'll see it in everyday use. For the most part, I think the web browsing experience will be the first thing that is transformative now. Instead of the first 3 pages of a web search response being advertisements now, you're going to get a recommendation from a chat GPT like tool about here's the website that has the answer to what you're really looking for, right? And so you'll have a transformative experience in a lot of these areas that will mimic some of these big transformative things like the introduction of the cell phone. So a year from now, I absolutely for sure that the web browsing experience will be 100 times different than it is right now. But some of the other ones, like is the college admissions process going to be as simple as that? That is something that is worth thinking about too. If someone really put their minds to it and tried to apply artificial intelligence to the college admissions process, could you make it very, very simple? I think it's possible. It may not be in a year though. So just because of the people and process pieces of it. But yeah, I think it's going to be a very fast-paced year for those of us who do technology for a living.
I think maybe just one thing to add on too. I think what'll be interesting in those very soon to have discussions, if you haven't had them on campus at the administrative and leadership level, and these questions should be answered or asked, which is, do we need these processes, not these tools, but these processes at all? So a funny one that I always talk to my kids about, because they're now out of college. One day my daughter called and said, I'm going to a very large four-year public institution that will remain nameless. They've known me for 4 years. I've applied for admission. I've given them every piece of information about me and frankly, you as a parent, Dad, known to man, known to mankind. And you now know more about me than my doctor does. Why in the world do you as an institution need me to apply to graduate? Wow. I've paid, I've attended, you have my grades, you have my information, you have everything about me as a student, and yet you need me to tell the institution, can I now graduate? So the reason I bring up that example, it's a funny one, but there really needs to be some discussions, I think, on campuses across the country of, do we need processes like this? And what is its goal? Do we really need students to apply for graduation, or should we be proactive and use a tool that's an AI generative tool or a chatbot tool or a two-way messaging and texting tool to say, you only need these couple classes to graduate. Click here to register now. Because maybe the student will want to graduate sooner, or not even graduate, but complete, whatever their definition of completion is. Those types of things where I think technology that is new and interesting is always great. But how do we take away and sort of sunset some things that are no longer technologically necessary? A good example, maybe another silly example is, when refrigerators started handling your ordering of groceries. It sounds silly, but if you haven't done that, wow, that's powerful. Connecting your fridge to an online grocery store delivery service that says, hey, when I detect your milk is empty or you've thrown it away and that space is vacant, I'm going to order you milk automatically. That's game changer type stuff for busy adults, right? And that's a silly example, but to students, those silly things that we think are easy are sometimes very hard for them to get service for on campus. So whether it's an internet-based, AI-based appliance, or whether it's just, wow, my institution just told me we no longer have to apply to graduate, and that caps and gowns will be automatically sent to me. Wow, game changer. Thank you for making my life easier, says the student. Those are the things that I think can have just profound impacts.
Yeah, and increase the student or customer satisfaction. Absolutely.
That's what's going to make the student want to become a donor.
Yes, and keep it going, which is so important. Well, we're at our end, so I'm going to ask you both to just make a closing statement. And again, I just want to thank all of our attendees. I believe that the questions were either answered directly or were picked up by our panelists here to discuss. And then also in the chat, everyone can see that the URLs for both BlackBeltHelp and KAI if you want to have any further information. So closing remarks. Let's go. Start with you, Lou.
Yeah, I think we've talked and covered a lot of areas, Frank. I think it's going to be, I think the main message to leaders in higher education is that you have to be able to be conversant about this area and not be reticent about engaging with people who want to move forward. I think it's important to recognize these transitional times in technology and recognize them as an opportunity, for your organization. So I would say, embrace it. It's going to be a fun one.
Thank you. Anthony?
I think for me, the quick thing to leave folks with is do something. It's that simple. Do something. And that might be talking about it, but do something that has an action-oriented outcome or a desire. So set that goal, make it easy, make it small, but take that step, because students are wanting you to take those steps. And they're profoundly forgiving when you take a step, even if that is a misstep. I think what I've heard from students that are very transparent today, the more modern students are very transparent and very willing to be praising or focusing on negative issues. But what they can't stand is doing nothing. There's no excuse for doing nothing. There's definitely a way to work with someone when you try something, and if it works wonderfully, wonderful. If a piece works well, do more of that in the future. And if something doesn't work well, admit it and move on. But what a student just cannot tolerate is doing nothing.
I like it. Those are it's a great way to end it on those two. Lou and Anthony, want to thank you both for your time, and everyone who attended. Again, want to thank you. We want to keep providing these tech talks just to provide discussion and some thought for all of us. And if you'd like any more information, just please reach out. And again, thank you so much for attending this tech talk. Goodbye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.